All right, and we are live on, well, definitely X, YouTube, and of course at nyngpaweather.com. Facebook is being a little glitchy. I'm not sure whether that's coming through or not, but it looks like everything else is working pretty good. So if you're having any issues, my suggestion is go to YouTube or X, or if you're a premium member, well, you could just stay right here, right? So there's a couple of things that we're going to be talking about tonight. First, of course, we're coming up on the anniversary of 9/11, which is, of course, very important to all of us, especially us in this area of the country. So, of course, never forget all that stuff. But man, it's always a rough time of year for many of us around this time of year. So, my condolences for anyone who might have been impacted by that horrible day. Of course, there's other things going on in the news today that is very sad. We're not going to get into it, but just you know, you know me, I love talking and exposing myself to different ideas. So we need to be able to do that without getting heated because exposing each other to different ideas is how we grow and how we get better. And when we put ourselves in echo chambers, that can lead to very bad things. Talking about echo chambers, I want to share two books I already went over, but I think that's really important for climate that I would like you guys to read. One of them is Our Fragile Moment by Michael Mann on climate. And the other book to go with it would be Climate Uncertainty and Risk by Judith Curry. Now, why would I want to read these two? Well, because they're opposing ideas. And I was going to bring this up because I mentioned it in a post I put on X about what books I like to read to get a fuller idea on climate. And they're kind of polar opposites. And well, Mr. Dr. Mann can be a bit, I guess the word is abrasive. Okay. Um, but even with that, I think it's important to read those two types of ideas on how they see climate science, whether it is what we know, what we don't know, our uncertainties. That way, you get a full idea, a full um, range of views. So that way, you can make your own decisions on what you think of the climate science. What I want to foster, what I want for you guys who are following me is not to just agree with everything I think. I want you to expose yourself to different ideas and you create what you feel is a proper way of handling this and many other issues. Also, just on a brighter note, much more fun, more note. Um, I have set up week 2 of the NFL with my picks. Last week I went 8-8. The Chiefs let me down. I don't know what's going to happen with the Chiefs versus the Eagles, but I think they're going to rebound and play much better. Another thing too is that the Mets, they are down 2-1. Uh, 2 outs in the fourth. The Phillies are driving me nuts. Well, the way that the season has gone is that the Mets do really well at home, and the Phillies do really bad on the road. Literally, what is it? I think they're five. The Mets are 1-5 in Philadelphia, but 6-0 at home. So that's kind of crazy. So it just seems like neither team can win at either home, which is crazy. But we'll see whether the Mets actually make the playoffs this year. It's a little iffy. So we'll see how that plays out. So let's get to the tropics. Very interesting. We are at the peak of the hurricane season. You might not know it. It is dead quiet. We have a potential development, but this is like 5 days out and it's like 20%. For this time of year during the heart of the hurricane season, that is amazingly low. Now, look, there are a couple factors that are driving this, and we've been talking about this for quite some time. In fact, in the uh, tropical forecast for the Atlantic, I was going with near normal because I wasn't buying a true La Nina idea, and the sea surface temperatures were not drastically warm, but also we were dealing with a lot of dust. and basically a lot of wave breaks with high pressure systems driving dry air in to the Atlantic. And I thought that was going to be a continuing problem. I didn't think it'd be this much of a problem. I figured the reason why I went near normal, which is about 13, 14 storms, is that look, the NHC lately really likes to name subtropical low pressure systems off the East Coast that linger for about 24 hours. Beforehand, they weren't really doing that. Okay. Before 2000, they really weren't doing that. Since then, they are. And so I figured, okay, so I'm going to hedge my bets that you're going to continue to do that. So let's go with near normal. And of course, you can check out the reasoning behind that forecast of premium members in the archive section. But when we take a look and see if there's any changes, well, all right, first of all, we don't really have a La Nina influence at all. We have a cold neutral state, but we still have plenty of dry air. We have some shear. The um, intertropical convergence zone is wavy, okay, but you're having some influence of dry air coming off the African coast, which we can let me set up right here. This is dry air. See this? This is like the best way to describe this. It's like diamond dust, right? If you watch baseball, you know after the rain, they want to try to dry out the infield. So they guy wanders around. Sometimes they do a little cha cha, a little dance, but they start to dump this stuff. Now, what's called is diamond dust, and it basically dries everything out, right? Well, when you do that to tropical systems, you basically kill them. And typically, this time of year, you don't see this type of robust signal here of dry air. You see it during the early part and towards the latter end of the year, but typically not in the heart of the hurricane season. So, all this dry air and dust is choking off potential development. This is why I was not very aggressive, let's just say, like putting out maps and whatnot for the last tropical disturbance that went from 90% to 10%. Because I looked there, I'm like, well, all right, it has a chance based on the model guidance, but it's got to get through all this dry air. So we'll keep an eye on it, see if anything develops, see if there's a low level circulation, but the dry air killed it. Models are still having a difficult time handling that. Even the AI models, yep, even them are having a difficult time handling this factor. So when we study the influence here on the dry air, you see there's a potential here for another tropical wave, and this is what they're highlighting, moving off the African coast and trying to develop. What signal that stands out to me? Well, how about this? This dry air getting into whatever circulation's trying to organize here. It is a sign. It is a warning sign that yeah, there's a chance that something could develop here, but dry air is probably going to be an issue. And oh, by the way, a nice deep trough over the Western Atlantic and along the East Coast is going to kick anything that tries to form and send it right out. In fact, when I look at this signal, well, it looks like that because of the strong southwesterly shear, it actually enhances the outflow here. So it tries to produce a stronger tropical cyclone, or in this case, maybe a hurricane out of this. But we're talking like 10 to 15 days out. But there's a lot of warning signs here before jumping the gun on any of this stuff. And of course, you have other tropical disturbances trying to develop. Um, but here's the main thing here. You see this ridge right here? This whole setup here just keeps on driving the dry air from the Sahara Desert right into the tropical Atlantic. And as long as that continues to be a theme, you're not going to see a lot of tropical development. All right, you're going to have a lot of factors inhibiting that development. And oh, by the way, all your climate influences are not exactly playing nice either for much of an active season, which means that we could end up with a well below normal season. I mean, when you take a look at this forecast here, this is basically a combination of maybe two storms. Okay, this isn't like 10 storms. This is two storms. This is one storm. This is another storm. Not exactly a robust amount of activity for this time of year. So what that would get us up to like maybe 10. So again, I'm not seeing a lot of strong signal here in tropical forcing. And in terms of the tropical forcing, um, to influence the hurricane season, we have a slightly positive SOI. So that would say, okay, maybe a little bit more favorable. Then we look at the MJO and it's dead. I mean, it peaks into phase 8 and 1 a little bit, but it's not strong and it doesn't remain very long. And it briefly peaked into phase 2, but again, didn't really produce much. So I'm not seeing a strong MJO support. We already know that the Enzo support is meh. So that's not really standing out. I mean, you got basically a cold neutral case. Into phase 2, if it pops in, you might see a little burst of activity. That's probably what we're seeing in the model guidance with the support that show up maybe for a tropical disturbance. But there isn't really anything that's strong. And when we look, let me just pull up real fast and show the observations here. Here we go. Hopefully no one got whiplash doing that. All right, so here we are. This is the influence of the cold pool and the Kelvin wave that set up the cold anomalies in the subsurface. And we're basically around -3 minus minus 0.3 to minus 0.4 degrees Celsius. This is cold neutral. Maybe you get minus 0.5 here for maybe a couple of weeks based on what we're seeing here with the subsurface, but that might not be until November. So again, this is not a strong signal, and we're not seeing a strong signal with the SOI. And the influences of our weather pattern are all more being influenced by a stratospheric influence, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but not a lot is standing out to me. And oh, by the way, the atmospheric angular momentum also is not exactly supportive for a lot of tropical activity either. So I am not seeing much in terms of strong support for a powerful tropical development. I do expect an uptick because, I mean, look, mid September, early October, I could definitely see 1 or 2, maybe 3 storms popping off. If not, then we're going to be dealing with probably one of the quietest seasons we've seen in over 20 years, if not longer. So that is certainly catching my eye. We'll see how that plays out. Now, another factor that we're watching for the fall, I've been talking about this with premium members for quite some time. Here is what we need to watch. You see that this part right here, this feature right here. Well, this warm stratospheric environment has been in place since May. That's quite a long time. Notice everywhere else you see pulsing of warm stratospheric anomalies and cold stratospheric anomalies going back and forth. And typically you see that a lot in the warm season. Now we're going into the cold season. What I'm waiting for is to see if this remains sustained as we move through the fall. Because if it does, then that is what's driving your negative EPO for the cold season. We know what drove it for the warm season. The blob right there, that warm feature right here. Okay, that's very clear. All right, we don't want to jump the gun and make that association for the rest of fall and the winter until we get this sustained, especially for December, January, and February. Now, the way that the model guidance is handling this, like CANSIPS and European 45 day and the CFS, is that they're trying to produce a sustained negative EPO signal for the winter. This signal, just so no one gets overly excited, does not guarantee major snowstorms, but it does certainly set up the transport of polar and Arctic air masses from the Arctic Circle into, at the very least, the central part of the country, possibly the East Coast, depending on the placement of the trough axis, the blocking in the Atlantic, the interaction with the subtropical jet stream. So you can easily get an Arctic air mass dropping into the plains, but then by the time it reaches the east, it moderates, something like that. You can make that case. Or you can make a case where Arctic air dominates the eastern two-thirds of the country. You get the subtropical jet stream interacting, you get negative NAO, and boom, winter storms everywhere. You can make a case for both. So I don't want anyone to say, oh, negative EPO means snow. No, negative EPO means there's a better potential for a lot of cold air to be in play. But then we have to wait and see, and this is why we don't issue winter forecasts in August and in September. We have to wait to see the development of the polar air mass and Arctic air mass, for that matter, snow growth in Siberia and northern Canada, so we get an idea of what the cryosphere is like, the evolution of the rest of the stratosphere, and of course the evolution of our tropical impacts. Okay, maybe I'm wrong about the fact that we end up with a cold neutral ENSO event. Maybe we'd get a more robust La Nina than I thought, or maybe I'm right. So we don't know yet. Okay, we have to wait for more data to come out, which is why we don't issue forecasts early. Other people can. God bless them. Let them have fun. So the way that looks like in the 500 millibar pattern, I'm watching this very carefully. Of course, you would expect some sort of relaxation of the EPO at some point as we move through the fall. But even then, it's kind of wavering more towards a negative state. And when we take a look at some of the model guidance here, with that relaxation, you still have a lot of upper level lows hanging around on multiple models, European AI, and the EPS, the European ensembles. So you can clearly see that evolution showing up here. And this signal is still popping up here to support trough here, ridge here, broad trough here. Okay, and you could even make the case possibly for a somewhat negative NAO as you move into late September. Okay, so maybe you get like an upper level low hanging around the Canadian Maritimes and more of a Canadian Maritime influence. All these factors are still in play, but the signal that is being driven is clearly driven by stratospheric influences. So we certainly got that we're going to be watching for, and that's going to keep our weather pattern active, unsettled as we move forward. Meanwhile, well, we had a regular low pressure system slash trough hanging around the coastal words today. Model guys had a very difficult time in deciphering whether or not we're going to be seeing heavy rainfall. We had some periods of moderate rainfall along the Jersey Shore here. We had a little bit in Freehold, got about a tenth of an inch of rain. Again, overall, we're seeing that rainfall remained off the coast, but overcast cloud cover and a little bit of drizzle, some showers, but nothing that was too impressive. And again, on the radar, you can see not a lot of development. There's our low pressure system out here. So why didn't we see a robust big storm out of this? Let me see right here. Okay, so here's our upper level winds. So you had your negative EPO signal shifting more towards the Gulf of Alaska, and you can see the polar jet stream here is awfully wavy. Okay, the subtropical jet stream is awfully wavy as well. And what basically happened was, as the disturbance in the subtropical jet stream kicked off this low pressure system, it wasn't in line and in sync with the polar jet stream. So as a result, what you ended up with was a weather pattern that didn't phase. And so anything that develops over the coastal waters is going to more likely get kicked to the east. And that was always the idea. The only concern was, where are we going to get just enough moisture to squeeze on to the coast and maybe produce a period of moderate to heavy rainfall? Um, Turned out no. I was skeptical for a while, but I need to also put out some impact maps just to make sure that, hey, we have everything under wraps. Oh, by the way, the Mets are now losing 4-1. Wonderful, guys. Outstanding job, guys. So with that, this gives you kind of a warning for other storm potential that is out there for next week. And it comes via an upper level low that will be diving south uh, right here. This feature right here. What's going to happen is that this will head down towards Quebec and then drop southward and interact with a shortwave in the subtropical jet stream to form a strong upper level low over our region. And the way that looks is like this in the model guidance. There it is, drop south. Now, here is where the volatility falls in here. If this ends up a little bit further east, let's say it drops down towards Long Island, then a lot of your rainfall that's being forecasted for Sunday night, Monday, and Tuesday ends up off the coast. So this has to drop down just right, basically right towards the Delaware River Valley, for us to end up with a impressive rainfall event that is starting to show up in the model guidance. If it doesn't, if it ends up a little bit further east, which is possible because you have all this other noise to the west here, then what you end up with is just a few scattered showers, not a heavy rainfall event. But in this case, if you get this upper level low set up like this, then what you end up with is interaction of a lot of deep tropical moisture setting up for next week that gets thrown back into the region, which entails the potential for heavy rainfall. So I'm going to be watching this very carefully, this phase. As far as the weekend itself, we'll have an onshore flow with a few pesky showers, but not a washout in any way, shape, or form. Overcast cloud cover with a few pesky showers, but nothing crazy. So if you have any outdoor plans for Saturday and Sunday, wouldn't worry about it. But I'll be watching this very carefully for Monday. If that upper level low and thus the surface low ends up here, then the surface low ends up here. And so all this rainfall that shows up ends up out here. Okay. Maybe clipping portions of Boston, Rhode Island, Eastern Connecticut, Eastern Long Island, rather than right over the I-95 corridor. So we're going to be watching that to see how that evolves. Right now, there is a lot of strong support of dropping that upper level low right into the Delaware River Valley and right into eastern Pennsylvania, which would lead to this solution. But again, with the whole 500 millibar pattern overall, I can certainly see this getting kicked to the east and not being as significant. So we'll be watching that over the next couple of days. And then after that, we remain active, but no major storms showing up for the rest of September. We'll zoom out a little bit, and you can see there's that feature dropping in. Certainly have a persistent onshore flow between high pressure to the north of us and a lot of troughs and low pressure systems to the south of us. So there's going to be a lot of easterly winds. I would not be surprised if we see a lot of minor coastal flooding being a theme because of the persistent easterly winds, allowing waters to build up. So watch out for that as we move through the rest of September. The increase for minor, maybe even some moderate coastal flooding, especially if you get a nice alignment of the moon, setting up the potential for some flooding here, but also a few showers as well. But no major storms showing up after that. So we'll keep an eye on that. With that, I am going to take your questions and see what we have here. Again, as always, we answer everything first in the live chat, and then after that, we go to social media. We go until we answered all the questions, and then we shut down for the night. As always, I kind of take anytime we have a lack of questions for this week because hey, look, there's not a lot of major storms going on, then I shut it down a little bit earlier so that way I save my voice, save myself for when the weather really gets crazy. So let's see here. Card has a few questions here. Now with a note, I've got to say Baptism Scene from The Godfather is still one of the best. Yep, certainly a great movie if you haven't watched it. Peak of hurricane season, even the 18Z GFS can't spin up an Atlantic basin hurricane. Yeah, it's impressive. It really is. I mean, this is great news. You know who's upset about all this? It's the people that post these nonsense posts on social media about Category 5 hurricanes impacting the United States or Florida, what have you. And make all the scary music with it and all that stuff. They got nothing. They got no content. So they're gonna have to revert back to scaring people with other nonsense like aliens or something. So it is quiet and it's going. I really don't see a strong signal for a U.S. impact, which is good, which is great, at least for the next 15 days. Maybe just 1 week, and the cooling at the 700 and 850 millibars in just 1 week is quite noticeable. Lots of blues, cold temperatures at those levels. Earth New School. All right, let's take a look at Earth New School. Let's see here. I had this set up here. 850 millibars. Look at that now. Let me set that up here. Look at this polar air mass that is building. Certainly, a good healthy amount. Not unexpected, but certainly robust here. Now, what we're going to be watching for is the growth of snowfall here and here. Okay, northern Canada and Siberia. If we see pretty good snow growth taking shape in late September and October, that's going to open up the potential here for very interesting winter. Okay, because snow growth in Siberia, there's a lot of strong connections of causing a weaker polar vortex. But also, you want to see above normal snow growth in Canada because that allows your polar air masses to build more. So you want to see that evolve here. So certainly some interesting data definitely showing up in that respect. Let's see what we got on YouTube. Not a lot. Let's see here. Could there be severe weather with the system you just showed for Monday? No, it's just rainfall. There's no Cape values are negative, or like not negative, but like around 100 or less. So it's not really all that impressive. Will the weather pattern become more favorable for coastal storms in October and November? Hard to say right now. What you would need for that is a more sustained negative NAO. Now, there is some debate on this and whether or not you want that. So let me explain why. Typically, there's a statistical anomaly that stands out that when the NAO is generally positive in October, that it tends to be more negative in December and January. So, do you want your coastal storms in October and November, or do you want them more in January and February, or December and January? So there's that. And there is some physical connection as to why we see that. If you get a sustained negative NAO pattern, um, typically that illustrates that the Arctic Oscillation is displaced further to the south, but still kind of strong. Then, as the polar vortex strengthens, it kills off the potential for the negative NAO as you move through the late fall and winter. Whereas when you have a positive NAO, it builds up the heat content that impacts the Arctic, that displaces the polar vortex and weakens it. So there is that physical connection. I wouldn't call it a killing influence on your winter forecast. I wouldn't base a winter forecast based on those statistics, but it is an interesting little notification of the way that the pattern's evolving. I will say that if we continue to see the negative EPO pattern, the potential for the negative NAO pattern increases in November and December. So that's certainly something that we'll be watching for. But I don't have any type of um, trustworthy data to go one way or the other in that respect. Let's see here. Our card says we need rain. We need the rain. So some rain early next week is very welcome. Yeah, we definitely need a good amount of rainfall here setting up. We do not want to move into a drought, that is for sure. Anything going on X? Right, that's good to hear. All right, so let's see here. Again, I wasn't expecting a real active night. There really isn't a lot going on. I gotta be honest. I'm really surprised with the tropical Atlantic. Um, I figured it would be a moderate season, but this is the peak. So usually you see something really starting to get going. Um, I mean, at the same time, I'm happy. I mean, look, we don't need any tropical systems anywhere near here. One person I met on X was actually really complaining, really upset about it. Like, I want to see hurricanes. I'm like, you clearly do not own a house or have any property at all. A car, I don't know, Star Wars collectibles, something. Okay, because all of that is at risk when you're dealing with a hurricane. Especially in northern Atlantic. Loved ones, anything. I mean, let's be honest here. This is great news. No one wants a tropical system, and from a meteorological standpoint, it's going to be interesting to see the heat content in the Western Atlantic here. So, if we don't see a lot of tropical systems around the Gulf Stream and whatnot for the rest of the year, that means you're building up a lot of heat in the Gulf and in the Western Atlantic. And so, what you have that you have a lot of rising motion, which increases cyclogenesis. It also means that there's more of a magnet to get those polar and Arctic air masses to come out of the Arctic and drop down into the mid latitudes because of that imbalance in your temperatures from the water temperatures to the continent. So you increase the potential for stronger cold air transport, and it just leads to a far more interesting season because now you're enhancing your thermal gradients. So typically, when I see a year where the tropical activity is low in the Western Atlantic, that can support not so much above normal snowfall, but above normal cyclogenesis on the East Coast, i.e., more nor'easters. So that is something that I am also watching very carefully to see how that plays out. Let's see. Norm says, I feel the severe weather in New York City Metro this summer was not as robust as other summers in recent memory. Yeah, and the reason why that is the case is because in previous years we had more of a southwesterly wind influence, and you had a lot of disturbances interacting with the urban heat island effect and the transport of deep tropical moisture, and that led to a higher potential for thunderstorms. This year we had the tropical influence, don't get me wrong, but we also had a lot of maritime influences. And when you have a lot of maritime influences, you're introducing a lot of stable air into the equation. Because what you end up with is a lot of days, especially on the coastal plain, where you get 85, but the dew point is 70, but the atmosphere is cooler at the surface, whereas at 850 millibars is 20 degrees Celsius, which would support 90s at the surface. So the atmosphere actually ends up being stable. So you're having a lot more of those maritime influences, but we had a lot more of the southeasterly winds, easterly winds, and so you end up with less potential. I think we saw that a lot this summer, and so that's why we saw a less robust severe weather season this year. Let's see. Not sure why someone would want a hurricane. Neither do I. I don't get it myself. Happy is quiet in the Atlantic also. Yeah, I mean, I think most people are pretty happy with that. I mean, there are some weirdos out there, let's be honest. They're just, I don't know what they're thinking, but interesting times. That's for sure. I don't know what else to say about that, but just some interesting guys running around, very upset that for whatever reason, severe weather isn't, should I say, hurricanes aren't impacting the United States. Seems the theme of the summer was stable marine air for the wind. Yeah, pretty much. That is a good theme. That is definitely a theme that we saw quite a bit this summer. Um, really, you had the interaction of two air masses, tropical and maritime. Tropical and northern Atlantic maritime. And when you had those, you end up with a weather pattern where we had some pretty impressive rainfall events, and then we had nothing. So you went from flooding to drought, and there was nothing in between. Like we never had just a regular pattern with near normal rainfall and some hot days, but also a good amount of rainfall. You either went with 95 and it never rained, or you had the onshore flow and you had some periods of rain that wouldn't stop, which led to flooding, but a lot of dry days. eases at least when it comes to fishing. Oh, I get it because easterly wind influence. You know what? The thing is that the easterly wind it pushes the Gulf Stream closer to the coast. I wonder how much of an impact that has on the fish. I would guess a significant impact because maybe the fish. I would think that the Gulf Stream would feature more fertile feeding grounds, so the fish are more likely to head out towards that Gulf Stream than they would towards the immediate coast. Maybe that is a thing as well. I don't know. I'm not a fisher, but that's what I would suspect. Okay, you have any other questions on X? Okay, and YouTube's quite as why? Why what? Why the East? What are yeah, that is very open. Why what? Why is Bader constantly getting hits? My God, what is he batting 700 against the Mets? My God. Let's see here. Would our climate here be different if the Great Lakes didn't exist? Oh yeah, totally. For one, in the winter, you wouldn't have any type of moderation impact from the Great Lakes. Um, so there's that. You would also have um, stronger polar air masses in the summer by a small degree. Of course, if you don't have the Great Lakes, I would think that you wouldn't have the Finger Lakes because it was created by the same factor. Um, you also wouldn't have so if you can't just remove the Great Lakes because the influence that made the Great Lakes also made the Hudson River Valley and also the Appalachian Mountains. So you would have to remove all that. Um, but if you just try to remove the Great Lakes, those would be the two primary factors. Let's see here. What else? I'm just trying to run in through my brain there. Um, we already went over the air mass influences. It wouldn't really change cyclogenesis all that much on the East Coast because you still have the Gulf Stream. I think that's pretty much about it. Just thinking off the top of my head, but certainly that would certainly be an interesting influence for sure. Stable air for the win. We got the questions. And let's see here. We're not going to do why anymore. I got retracted. You know, why is such an open-ended well, that's true. Why? Why anything? I often ask I often ask that when I'm watching the Mets. Like why? Why aren't we pitching properly? Why aren't we hitting let's see. Queens had the extreme flash flooding event last month. Since then, it has been very dry. Had 8 inches in 30 minutes by the Clearview Expressway. That's true. Yeah, we went 8 inches and then nothing. It's funny how that plays out. Well, if we don't have any more questions and we don't have a lot of activity going on right now, so that's certainly good news. We're going to we'll do one more check on X. See if there's anything showing up there. Facebook actually worked. Figures. How did that? I give up. It half worked. Does the time? Oh, this is a good one. Does the timing of snow growth in northern Canada and Siberia matter? How much does that play? It matters significantly. Um, The snow growth in Siberia has a noted impact, especially when you have it from in early to mid October, where you have the expanse the greatest. Has been noted in highlighting the process to disrupt the polar vortex. The snow growth in northern Canada matters significantly throughout the entire winter because your polar and Arctic air masses are moving through Canada to get to us. If northern Canada and central Canada, for that matter, uh, are have no snow, that means that as the polar and Arctic air masses are dropping southward, they are they are moderating faster because of influences with the urban heat island effects and just ground in general, the sunlight, because when you have snowpack, it reflects the sunlight, so the polar air mass or the Arctic air mass are able to retain their influences. So by the time they reach the northern Atlantic, they're far weaker. So you want to see where your snow growth is in those areas. In Canada, we watch it the entire winter. So whenever you get a surge of Pacific air moving into Western Canada, and pushes towards the Hudson Bay, that wipes out all the snow, which means that any type of polar Arctic air mass that follows is going to have to reestablish that snowfall, and likely is going to be a weaker polar Arctic air mass than one would suspect. So there are those factors. The Siberian factor matters in the fall in terms of setting up the process to disrupt the polar vortex. But I will say this: the above normal snowfall does not in Siberia does not guarantee an active winter for us. It only starts the process of disrupting the polar vortex. If the polar vortex is disrupted and ends up in China, then we're still going to have a quiet winter. So it's not a prediction that would support above normal snowfall or cold winter for the northern Atlantic. All it does is support the weakening and disruption of the polar vortex. Where that polar vortex goes, that's a different question. Okay, so just so we understand that. So in in this in the Siberian factor, earlier is better. Okay, it really doesn't have much of a factor if you see a massive snow growth in mid to late November. In the Canadian, it matters the whole winter. Let's see here. Do you think beach erosion could have long-term effects on local climate? Yes, it definitely would. It's more gradual though, because your beach erosion, it starts to influence also your currents in the ocean, so that's certainly a factor. Yeah. Could the Mets drop out of the wild card? Uh here's the thing about the Mets is that, and really all the NL teams, they're extremely streaky. So it does not look good, at least for tonight. The Mets are not going to lose any ground because the Giants lost. We'll see what the Reds do later. Um, but it's not looking good right now. But they're not going to lose any ground. I would have liked them to win, but it's not looking very good right now. I can tell you that. Um, I think they're going to pull off the wild card just because it's typical Mets. This is what's going to happen. Okay, they haven't won a game since trailing in the eighth inning all year, and probably they'll go through the whole season. They'll sneak in barely into the wild card, right? And then for every game all the way up to, let's say, the NLCS, they will win. They'll going all the way up to the World Series. Let's go there. This is typical Mets, right? Every game in the playoffs from that point on, they'll have a comeback in the eighth inning, and they'll have like 7 comebacks in a row, all in the eighth or ninth inning. That is typical Mets. That is exactly that would fall right into the whole theme of being a Mets fan, which is why many Mets fans are either unstable or have a lack of hair, because that is just typical Mets. Let's see here. What does weather start? Where does weather start? Oh, that's a well. You certainly have Mountain Torque kickoff around there. Um, Weather, God, yeah, that's a great question. Weather doesn't really start; it just perpetuates. I mean, that's an interesting question. Let me think how I want to answer this. Well, you could make a case that a lot of our weather patterns evolve. Let's not say start, evolve based over the Pacific Ocean. Okay, you get a lot of your Kelvin waves developing there. You get a lot of your potential high latitude blocking there. Um, how the polar jet stream evolves over the Pacific has a huge impact on not only North America, but also Europe, which then translates over into Asia, which then you have influences with mountain torque around Tibet, for example, and around China, that then goes and influences the Pacific again. So I would say that the influences of pattern changes start off in the Pacific, especially when you have more robust tropical influence, and then cascades down, and then each influence moving forward impacts the next. So it's never really a start, it's more like a perpetual evolution. That's how I would see it. Good question, though. Okay, there's that. Oof, boy. Now, oh man, you have Stanikin, and he didn't give up a home run. Oh, that's a positive. It's 8-1 now. Yeah, they're not winning this game. Nope, nope. Which means I can go to bed earlier. So there's that for me. Because I don't get upset because this is typical Mets. I'm telling you, they'll squeeze into the playoffs, but not before giving everyone a heart attack, and then they'll make a run all the way to the World Series maybe, um, but not without driving everyone insane. That's just typical of the team. Okay, no, don't get me wrong. Yeah, it's gonna be one of those. And here's the thing too: when the Mets play the Phillies in the NLCS, right? This is what's gonna happen. It will come down to um, the Mets. Whoever wins one game at either home park will win that series. That will basically be come down to. I would not be surprised if it goes like 7 games if it happens, because that's just typical of what they do. But man, oh man, it has not been pretty. But I am excited about the young pitchers, though. The young pitchers they have, I've been very impressed with, because not so much, looking for them to like save the season and shut everyone down. What I'm impressed with is that when they get in trouble, they actually make adjustments and improve for the rest of the game, which is all you really look for in terms of young pitchers. Yeah, the Mets definitely have a tough schedule. That everyone that they play, except for the Marlins, who play them hard anyway, and the Nationals, um, are fighting for the playoffs. So, which means that all of them are fighting. So, there we go. Since June 12th, it has been a nightmare. That's all I can say. Um, when we talk about snow growth in Canada, what depths are we talking about that affect the weather in our area? Um, Usually, as long as you get over 2 inches of snow, usually that does the job in terms of the snow, in terms of the influence of the air mass. 1 inch is, I think, is too little, but usually you get about 2-3 inches of snow. That's really all the depth you need. Now, typical in Canada, you can talk about feet, which of course really sets everything up very nicely. So usually you want to get over that 2 inch mark, and then you're usually pretty good. Oh boy. So if you see that I lose my voice over the next couple of weeks, you know why now. Because I'm probably yelling at this team and then talking about the Chiefs. Don't get me started on that with the injuries and all that other nonsense. Not good. But yeah, look at the snow. What we'll be watching for, and typically um, what NOAA usually tracks in terms of the snow growth in Canada really starts off in Siberia. Usually starts off when we get over that 2 inch mark, and then you can place that 1 inch. It can basically evaporate very quickly. It's not really sustained enough. But usually, I'm looking for 2 inches or more. Um, and that usually sets up that influence that we're looking for in our weather pattern. Let's see. It surprised me to learn that our region is now classified as humid subtropical climate, no longer coastal temperate. Do you agree? Um, I don't know who. I haven't seen that change in the designation on at NOAA's website. I would not humid subtropical. I'd probably do Virginia on southward, especially North Carolina. Just ask my parents, definitely. Florida, definitely. Florida, definitely. Yeah, there's no. Florida is definitely humid. You can make a case. You can make a case that northern Florida is humid subtropical and southern Florida is just tropical. You could definitely make that case. Um, but for around here, I would say still temperate. You can't tell me. I mean, just look at the past 2 weeks. It's clearly not humid tropical or subtropical. That just isn't the case. So I'm not sure where that came from, but I would disagree with that because look at this summer. We've had tropical air masses, maritime air masses, polar air masses, Pacific air masses. This year more polar, more maritime than not. But that's clearly not something where your subtropical is more of a sustained tropical influence in the summer. So Köppen climate classifications. Yeah, I wouldn't. I would disagree. I would just disagree. At least for the northern Atlantic, you want to try. You could try to push that for Virginia, um, and maybe Maryland. But I would doubt. I would disagree. I would disagree. But you know what I also would want to do is see. Let's see if I can find. Let's see here. The Köppen. Let's see what they call subtropical. So let's see here. Köppen climate classifications. Let's see what they designate as. That's why I use classification scheme. Let's see the map here. Of course, it has to do with color, so it's nearly impossible for me to see. Of course. Uh, let's see. I'm trying to zoom in here. Let's see where we're at. Okay, so I think that is green. Of course, they have it as light green and blue. So two colors. Yeah, yeah. If you can just, I'm trying to see the colors here. Whether or not this is green or blue. You can't zoom in at all, can you? No, let's see if I can try to. Here we go. How's that? Okay. Southern half is green. Northern half is what? That's blue. Okay, so it's kind of split here. Jeez, that chart's great. Yeah, and they have like 10. It looks like what do they have? Like 10 different greens. That's why I said wonderful. I'm like, oh, this is wonderful. Jesus Christ. Yeah, no, I would drop that. I would drop that further south. Sorry, dude, you're wrong. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, that's fine. Let's see. But let's see. What are they designated as? Tropical monsoon, desert tropical. Let's see. Temperate climate C. So they should be. They got northern New Jersey and let's see here. Let's see. Subtropical highland. Warm Mediterranean. Yeah, so they got us in temperate in northern half of the region and tropical in the other half. Nah, I'm not going with that. Sorry, new temperate. I'm gonna go with temperate. Sorry guys. Sometimes you just gotta say no. I disagree. Let's see. I think the change is based on winter temperatures 3 months in a row below freezing. Uh I would I'd be really careful in doing that personally. So I'm going with it never got above 32 for high temperatures for the entire month. Yep, we definitely, and let me tell you, if we have a sustained negative EPO, we're going to see that. We're going to definitely, if that happens. But we'll see if that plays out. So we're about 8:55. We can call it a night, based on the fact that I'm starting to lose my voice. It was definitely a great night. This was outstanding. Outstanding questions as always. That last one was a doozy. That's a good one because I'm colorblind, so I'm trying to look at this map. So I got Susan to come over to help me out because I can't see. Apparently, they separated to blue. Yeah, blue and green. And when being colorblind, blue and green look the same to me. So it's like I could tell there were two different shades of gray, but I couldn't see it much. So that was a lot of fun. That's it for tonight, though. Thank you as always. I really appreciate it, and it really makes a difference to me that you guys are here. And I don't know, after the past couple of days, and also the being 9/11 tomorrow, just make sure that you hug the people you care about. Um, and as always, stay safe out there.